Hello, everyone. Uh, Welcome to our asynchronous session for this week. I just wanted to go ahead and start off with saying that hopefully you guys are reading Shakespeare already. We'll be reading Romeo and Juliet, which is a pretty popular play. Some of you may have read it before. Um, I think quite a few, almost half and half, typically have read this before, and that's okay. But it'll be good to refresh your memories. And if this is the first time, even better, you get to read something new. As we're starting this, I just want to make sure that you guys aren't going to have any trouble. I know some students have a hard time reading or understanding Shakespeare, and that's okay. It was written a long time ago with a foreign language. Um, so it's not only in Old English, it's in Shakespearean Old English, which is something completely different of its own. So really quick, I just want to show you if you are having trouble when you get to it. Let's see. When you get to the reading in the teacher notes, there is a link that you can click that will allow you to pull up a more modern translation of it. That'll make it easier. So you see here when you get, when you're about to read it, in the teacher notes, the big blue here, go ahead and click it, and you will be led to this web page where if you go down, you see it has the original text as well as a more modern translation. For example, Gregory, on my word, will not carry coals. What that kind of means more in today's speak is Gregory, on my word, we will not be humiliated, like carrying coal. Right? So still maybe some references we may not know as well still, because why would carrying coal be humiliating? We don't know. But it'll be easier for us to understand as you go on, and you can, reference how it was spoken and how it might be translated today. So that's a good resource. I want to make sure that all of you have and are aware of. Definitely keep an eye out for that. Today, what we're going to be going over is just going to be the social context and wordplay. So these are two big things to keep in mind when we're thinking about Shakespeare. So first, let's go ahead and start off with social context. Oops, if I can get my buttons straight. All right, here we go. So to kind of think about it, let's go ahead and think of, a lot has changed in the world in the last 50 years, even, 60 years. Um, Even just thinking of how someone's childhood was, like maybe the toys they played with, has really changed. Think of your parents. So your parents should have been born probably between the 60s and maybe early 90s. No, probably between 60s and 80s, your parents were born. Um, and so think about some of the things that they played with. Back in the day, we had, well, this is before my time, but Stretch Armstrong was the coolest toy you could have. And you could kind of see it up here. This is just a little dude that you're able to stretch really, really far. And now he's actually a collectible. But back when it was first introduced, this was a really cool toy, and everybody wanted a Stretch Armstrong. Today, that's not really what we play with, right? Today, it's the new Rock Band 4. It's the newest, a PS4, Xbox One, um, those little like Nintendo DSs, I believe they're called, or tablets. Those are kind of toys that a lot of kids are playing with nowadays. More video games or technology-based toys. Um, and even if you look at Barbies, they've changed a lot in the last 50 years. Um, you had the traditional blonde petite Barbie with old clothes, and now we even have stuff like the little brat dolls with the giant heads and the really tiny bodies and the big feet, and even just the way it's represented has changed a lot. And so a lot of what you grow up with influences kind of what you know of the world, right? So if you were born, 50 years ago, you wouldn't really be of cell phones or computers having like a part in everyday life, because you grew up without it. So when you think of a problem, if you have a question, your first reaction wouldn't be, well, let me Google it, because Google didn't exist, right? So you would have to find another way. So libraries, talking to people, friends, racking your brain trying to figure out an answer to your question. Where now, um, because you've grown up in the technology age, if you have a question, you have access to your phone or a computer, a laptop, or anything nearby, and you can just figure out what the answer is. So those things, they shape the way that the time era, the way we see people are treated, um, the level of technology, medicine, what's on TV. All those things shape the way that we see the world. And if we were to tell a story, it would be based off of what we know, right? Pretty much, it would start with what we can imagine. So that's something to keep in mind when we're reading Shakespeare. It was written a long, long time ago. It, um, but it has survived all these years because it's such a great piece of literature. Let's look at the social context. How does this work? I keep hitting the wrong button. Okay, so let's think about Shakespeare's time. He was um, alive in the Elizabethan era. So the Elizabethan era was roughly between 1485 and 1603. He wasn't alive for the whole thing, obviously, because that would make him, over 200 years old. Um, but during his time, they just transitioned out of the Dark Ages. If you're not really familiar with the Dark Ages, that was when the Roman Empire fell and just a lot of catastrophe, and it was really dark. There was a lot of death happening because of wars, um, you know, other countries conquering people. A lot of death. I think death is probably the most prominent thing from around that time. Is very common. Another big thing when he was growing up, or during his time, was Catholicism. It was the dominant religion in England. People didn't have freedom of religion like we do in the United States, so pretty much everybody was Catholic. And that definitely influenced him. And as you're reading Shakespeare, or as you're reading Romeo and Juliet, you may notice there's a lot of allusion to the Bible um, in religion itself. And that's because that was a big thing when he was growing up, right? Um, Theater was also the main source of entertainment. So, they didn't have TVs, they didn't have computers, they didn't have phones, they didn't have really like anything. They had horses and theater and markets. So that's very different from here. So now if someone wanted to have fun here, we have, a plethora of options. We could go to the movies, we could go to an arcade, we could go, to fancy restaurants if you want to, or, what, like Peter Piper Pizza, where there's like a giant jungle gym inside the restaurant, Dave and Buster's, Chuck E. Cheese. We could go to zoos, we could go to, you know, there's botanical gardens where you look at plants. You could go to parks and play games. There's just a lot of more options that we have now as a source of entertainment. And back then, theater was kind of the main. It was like the big go-to, right? And so what was also different is that now, if you think of people going to the theater, like if you were to go to a show on Broadway in New York, people are typically dressed more formally, right? So they have good clothes on and they're polite in there. You got to be, it's pretty sophisticated to when you go see Broadway. You're polite. You watch the play. You clap. You cheer. And back then, it was really normal for the crowd to actually engage with the actors. They would heckle them. They would throw items at them. So because it was their only source of entertainment, they really got involved. So it would be the same as, maybe you're watching TV and whether it's a sports game or some reality TV show, if you may talk to the TV or, yell at the video game when you're playing it, um, that would be the same thing that they would do, but it was with theater. So, they would yell at the actors, they would throw food or items at them if they didn't like it. And so it's kind of almost like little dangerous profession because you might have stuff, hit you. But it was just very different from the way it is now, the way we see theater. Now, theater, actors are more respected than they were back then. Another thing that shaped it was, child death was very common. A lot of, kids would die before they reached adulthood, and that was a common thing. It was really sad, but it was common, and people would die, giving birth. Um, Also, because medical advances aren't where they are now, people would die if they got a cold or, if they got, a pretty bad injury, they would die because they didn't have medical advances to be able to prevent it. You may have heard of the plague. It was a disease, the plague ran through England and just killed a bunch of people because they weren't able to survive it. They didn't have any ways of really treating it to, help their immune systems beat it. And because things were a little less clean, they didn't have hand sanitizer, they didn't have um, those little bleach wet wipe things or Windex. So things were pretty dirty, and because of this, it added to a lot more sickness. So that's some things, that this is the world that he grew up in. And so when you're reading Romeo and Juliet, you can see these influences in his work. And you can do this with any reading. So you could do it with modern books if you want to read The Hunger Games, Harry Potter, looking at what the author kind of grew up in, what their society was. That's pretty much what they will reflect in their literature. When we're looking at his work, if you know anything about Shakespeare, you know he loves tragedies. There is a lot of death in almost every single one of his plays, especially his dramas. People die. He wasn't shy about killing off anybody, which is crazy. People are like, whoa. Like nowadays, we're like, why did the everybody's dead? Like what just happened? Back in the day, it was like, oh, okay, everybody's dead. I understand that, and that's understandable. So you see that in his work. Also, some of his writing was really, really dark. What Shakespeare did with Romeo and Juliet is he actually didn't write it based in his current time period. He wrote it um, kind of more in the Dark Ages, so a little bit in the past from where he was. So that would be the same, if you wanted to write a story and you wrote it about the 70s or the 60s, where you know about it, but you weren't actually alive for it. That's what he did for Romeo and Juliet. So it was based a little bit in the past and in a different place. It was based in, Verona, Italy, whereas he's from London. But you do see the influences. So he used his knowledge of the past and his knowledge of, current society and how things were, and he put it into his work. Something you might also notice is the ties in the family. So the gender roles were very strict. They were a lot more strict than they are today, and kind of, you should hopefully know from like history or just reading literature that, you know, back in his time, the dad was head of the household, and females didn't have really any power or say, and so once you got married, you became property of your husband, and if you were property of your dad, so your dad could say, all right, you're gonna go marry this person, you're gonna marry that person, you're never getting divorced, have a happy life, right? So it was a little, it was well, not a little, it was pretty different back then because of the culture and the time period, much different than what we know today. And you'll see some of those roles and how the wives maybe don't have as much say in things as you're reading the play with Romeo and Juliet's parents. So something to think about to maybe understand this is if you imagine that Shakespeare was born in the year 2030 and he wanted to write Romeo and Juliet based in our time, so 2016, early 2000s, what are some things that might change? What would be some differences? So the roles of the parents would probably be different because parents are almost kind of absent in in the play during that time. The life expectancy wasn't that long. People died in their 50s or 60s typically. So by the time you were 16 or something, you were considered an adult already, which is definitely different than how it is now. So think of some things that, maybe would be different if Shakespeare wrote it in our time. Romeo have handled certain situations? How would they even have met? Those are some interesting questions to think about, and that would help you, reflect on social context if it was made today. So one thing that Shakespeare is really well known for is his use of wordplay. He was a master at this. There are very few people who are equal to how much wordplay are in their things as he is. He used it for many reasons, and he used it a lot of it. He has a lot of puns and oxymorons and even sometimes paradoxes, allusions. These are things that help boost a writer's writing level because it makes their writing deeper. It gives it more meaning. So wordplay, this is a literary technique. It's what it does is It makes the actual words themselves the main subject of the work, rather than reading a paragraph, you're just looking at these specific words. So rather than, I guess, it gives you more, the individual words themselves, when looking at them, give you more information than just reading the whole sentence as a whole. So a couple of reasons that people use wordplay is its amusement for the audience. Puns back then were very, very common. This was kind of like the most common way to joke with people is to use a pun. So he has a lot of them in his work, and we'll look at a couple examples. Another reason was to add a double layer of meaning. So an innuendo, this was done a lot, and we still use innuendos today. A double meaning when you talk about one thing, but you're really discussing another. Um, so he definitely did that, and one thing that he's mostly known for is using wordplay to show someone's wit or how intellectual they are. What Shakespeare did is a person who has who constantly has wordplay. They're constantly making these jokes, like these wisecracks. Um, that shows how intelligent they are, or that this is a smart, this is a wise character. And so he does that a lot. And if you'll notice, I believe it seems the one that stands out the most in Romeo and Juliet to me is Mercutio. He is rarely ever serious. He's always cracking jokes. He's always using wordplay. He's actually a very smart and intellectual character in this play. And he's very important to it as well. So, there's a couple things to look at. So if you're looking at some of the dialogue and you're like, what is this person saying? Chances are they're probably using wordplay, which may be a little difficult for us to relate to because it's older. But if you break it down, you do see it, and it's definitely interesting. And you can see which characters were maybe a little simple and which ones were more developed, just based on what they're saying and the words they're using. So again, the common ones that you're going to be seeing is a pun, an oxymoron, a paradox, and an illusion. So a pun, like I said, it is the main form that was used a lot back then. And there's three ways to make a pun. Pun is just a form of wordplay where one statement seems to suggest two or more meanings. And the way it does this is using homonyms, homographs, or homophones. A homonym is, that's a hard word for me to say, homonym. Homonyms are words that have the same sound and same spelling but different meanings. And we'll see an example of this. A homograph are words with the same spelling but slightly different pronunciations and very different meanings. A good example of this is the word console. So if someone were sad and crying, do you want to go and console them and make them feel better? Or you could be saying, hey, can you grab my some napkins from my center console in my car, right? So they're spelled the same, different meanings. Console, counsel, different meanings, and they're pronounced a little bit differently. So those ones maybe are a little bit harder to think of examples of, but I think the ones that he mostly uses in the play that I've noticed are homonyms and homophones. So those are most common. Homophones are words which sound the same but are not spelled the same and do not have the same meaning. So there's, a couple words. You'll see some examples of those on the next slide. An oxymoron, you've probably heard of this. If you heard the term jumbo shrimp, this is just the combining of two terms that seem to contradict one another, but then they work. So jumbo shrimp, something big and something small, put it together and you have a description basically. These are pretty easy to locate. You just look for words that are next to each other that are opposites. And then you're like, oh, that's an oxymoron. I got it. A paradox, this is similar to an oxymoron. Oftentimes, an oxymoron and a paradox can be a little tricky to decipher and, tell the difference of. But a paradox presents the reader with a statement that seems impossible but true. This means that it's more of a situation that is given versus just two words next to each other. So oxymoron is going to be two words. Paradox is going to be like a whole sentence. That's a good way to kind of tell which one is which. An allusion is a figure of speech that refers to a well-known person, place, event, literary work, or piece of artwork. And you have definitely heard illusions before. Maybe you didn't know what it was called, but maybe, when people are making fun of old Shakespeare quotes like "to be or not to be, that's a question." You've seen that redone a million times. Also, in a lot of songs or even in movies, there's allusions to popular work, like typically historical work. So, some examples. The first one we have: "What a pity that youth must be wasted on the young." Youth must be wasted on the young. This would be an example of a paradox because we have youth and young. Um, if you're young, you're youth, right? There's no old people who are young because that would contradict itself, right? So what's saying it is, you know, young people, youth is wasted on them because they're young and they don't know better, but because they're young, they don't know better. Um, and so since this is a whole sentence, like a statement, this will be a paradox because we can't, um, excuse me, it's just a statement that seems contradictory, but when you think about it, it is true. And you're like, okay, no, there is truth to this statement. So that would be an example of a paradox. Um, the next one, her dad is seriously funny. This would be an example of a pun. Um, oh no, not a pun. I'm sorry. Her dad is seriously funny. This is an oxymoron because we have look at the word seriously and funny. Those two words are opposite of each other. It's hard to, if you're funny and serious, those are two different kind of moods that you would have. So that's an example of an oxymoron. You got the two words together that are contradicting each other. You're not looking at the whole statement. The next one, an elephant's opinion carries a lot of weight. This is a pun. We are looking at, this would be more of homonym kind of pun because we have the word weight, which has, it's spelled the same, but it could have, and it sounds the same, but it has two different meanings. An elephant's opinion carries a lot of weight. So that means it could be, just heavy as in pounds because elephants are big creatures. And it's also kind of referring to maybe anxiety or tension, or that's a very deep opinion, right? Um, that would also be what it's referring to. Next, we have an example of an illusion. The quote from Taylor Swift's song Love Story. Um, she says that you're Romeo, you're throwing pebbles, and my daddy said stay away from Juliet. So she's not, in this song, if you haven't heard it, which is, I mean, it's been on the radio, it's pretty old, but in the song, she's just singing, it's a little love song, but then she uses the names Romeo and Juliet. She doesn't say the play Romeo and Juliet, but she uses those two names, and so people refer back to the play Romeo and Juliet because it's such a popular and historical play that even if you haven't read it, you've most likely heard of it. So that's an example of an illusion. Next, we have another pun. What is the difference between a conductor and a teacher? The conductor minds the train, and a teacher trains the mind. So this is, the same thing where it's spelt the same way, but it has different meanings. So the conductor minds the train, as in, you know, choo-choo train, um, sorry, transportation, and the teacher trains the mind. This is going to be teaching or helping to develop. Same spelling, same sound, different meanings. So that would be the use of a pun. So if we look here, what kind of wordplay would this be? Um, Look at these examples. What do you think they would be? Romeo, you have dancing shoes with nimble soles. I have a soul of lead, so stakes me to the ground I cannot move. What kind of wordplay would this be? Look at the words themselves. Would this be a pun, paradox, oxymoron, illusion? What do you think? We also have second example, Romeo says, is love a tender thing? It is too rough, too rude, too boisterous, and it pricks like thorn. Mercutio then says, if love be rough with you, be rough with love. Prick love for pricking, and you beat love down. What would this be? Look at the words, any kind of sounds that were repeating themselves. So maybe if you read these out loud, or when you're reading Shakespeare and looking for wordplay, if you read it out loud, it might be easier to pick up some of these, just because you hear the sounds repeated. Or in the last example, why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything from nothing first create, O heavy lightness, serious misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep. Not is ugh, that is not what it is. This love I feel, that love, that feel no love in this. All right, so he's kind of like listing something. So I would again look at the words, look at um, the connection of words and how that would relate, and then what kind of wordplay would that be? What do you think it is? I don't know. So if you do have any questions about wordplay or Shakespeare or the play or other course or in general, go ahead. Feel free to contact me. I'm here. Um, Portal message, email, what have you. Go ahead. Reach out, let me know what you're having trouble with, and we can work on it together. Um, don't forget to complete the assessment to ensure that you get your points. Remember that when you're completing an asynchronous assessment, that your score is based on the accuracy of your answers. So be sure to take your time on them. If you're not sure, go ahead and pull up um, this video again with the questionnaire so you can, figure it out. Otherwise, have a good rest of your days or nights whenever you're watching this, and let me know if you need any help.